The first drops of autumn rain kissed the cobblestones of Valdres as Amelia Rosewood pressed her face against the cool glass of her chamber window. Below, the estate's gardens stretched like a tapestry of fading colors, where roses hung heavy. With the weight of the changing season, she'd always found solace in watching the grounds from her tower room, but tonight something was different. A figure moved between the hedgerows, barely visible in the dying light. Jackson Thorne had worked at the Rosewood estate for 3 years, yet Amelia had never truly noticed him before this moment. Perhaps it was because their worlds moved in. Separate circles, hers filled with silk gowns, piano lessons, and discussions of marriage prospects. His with hay bales, horseshoes, and the honest sweat of labor. But as she watched him tend to the late-blooming jasmine with gentle hands, something stirred within her chest. The next morning brought crisp air and golden sunlight that painted the manor in warm hues. Amelia found herself drawn to the gardens. Earlier than usual, her embroidery forgotten on the stone bench where she typically spent her mornings, she wandered the winding paths, breathing in the scent of dying roses and fresh earth, till she rounded a corner and nearly collided with a figure carrying a heavy watering vessel. "Forgive me, Miss Rosewood," Jackson said quickly, water sloshing. As he steadied the container, his dark hair fell across his forehead, and when he looked up, Amelia found herself staring into eyes the color of rich earth after rain. "No harm done," she replied, surprised by the breathlessness in her own voice. "I was simply exploring." Jackson's lips curved into the faintest smile. "The gardens are particularly beautiful this time of year. The jasmine blooms best just before the first frost." "You planted the jasmine?" Amelia asked, moving closer despite the voice in her head that warned against such familiarity with a servant. "My mother's favorite flower," Jackson said softly. She always said it reminded her that beautiful things could grow even in uncertain times. There was something in his voice, a gentleness that seemed at odds with his calloused hands and simple clothes. Amelia found herself wanting to know more, to understand the man behind the quiet demeanor she had glimpsed from her window. Would you show me?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Jackson hesitated, glancing toward the manor, where other servants moved about their duties. "I'm not sure that would be proper, miss." "Please," Amelia said. And the word hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. For the next hour, Jackson led her through hidden corners of the estate she had never explored. He showed her the herb garden where he grew remedies for the horses, the small greenhouse where he started seedlings for the spring planting, and the ancient wisteria that climbed the garden's back wall like a purple waterfall. "How do you know so much about growing things?" Amelia asked, as they paused beside a bed of late-blooming chrysanthemums. "My mother taught me before she died," Jackson replied, his fingers brushing the golden petals. "She said that understanding how things grow teaches you patience and hope. Hope. That even when everything seems dead or dying, there's always the possibility of new life. Spring always comes, Miss Rosewood, even after the longest winter." Amelia studied his profile as he spoke, noting the way his eyes softened when he talked about growing things. There was poetry in his words, a depth that surprised her. In her world, men spoke of politics and profit, of social connections and advantageous marriages. Jackson spoke of hope and renewal, of beauty found in simple things. "You may call me Amelia," she said quietly, "when we're alone like this." Jackson turned to look at her then, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Be proper, miss." "Perhaps not," Amelia agreed. "But I find myself caring less about propriety and more about other things." The admission hung between them, charged with possibility and danger. Jackson's jaw tightened, and she could see the war playing out across his features, duty warring with desire, caution battling with something deeper. "Amelia," he finally whispered, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. The sound of footsteps on gravel broke the spell. Jackson stepped back quickly as Alina, one of the kitchen maids, rounded the corner with a basket of herbs. "Your pardon, Miss Rosewood," Alina said with a curtsy, though her dark eyes flicked between Amelia and her brother with unmistakable concern. "Your father is asking for you." "Of course," Amelia replied, smoothing her skirts. "Thank you for the Lesson about the gardens, Jackson. He nodded stiffly. The easy intimacy of moments before, replaced by careful formality. It was my pleasure to serve, Miss Rosewood. As Amelia walked back toward the manor, she could feel Jackson's eyes following her. The proper thing would be to forget this morning, to return to her embroidery and piano lessons and thoughts of the suitable marriage her father was already arranging. But as she climbed the steps to the grand entrance, Amelia knew that forgetting Jackson Thorne would be impossible. That night, she found herself at her window again, watching as he moved through the gardens in the moonlight. When he paused beneath her window and looked up, their eyes met across the distance. Neither waved nor called out, but something passed between them in that moment. An acknowledgement that whatever had begun in the garden that morning was far from over. The autumn wind stirred the curtains at her window as Amelia finally stepped back into her room. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new reasons why they could never be together. But tonight, she allowed herself to hold on to the memory of her name on his lips, the way his eyes had softened when he spoke of hope blooming, even in the darkest seasons. 3 weeks had passed since that first morning in the garden, and Amelia had become a master of stolen moments. She knew exactly when Jackson would be in the stables, when he took his lunch beneath the old oak tree, and when he made his evening rounds through the gardens. Their conversations were brief but intense, filled with careful words that carried deeper meanings. The roses are struggling with the early frost, Jackson would say, but his eyes spoke of other struggles. Perhaps they need more warmth, Amelia would reply, her fingers brushing his as she pretended to examine the blooms. These moments sustained her through the increasingly suffocating routine of her daily life. Her father, Thomas Rosewood, had begun entertaining more visitors, lately wealthy merchants, and minor nobility, who eyed Amelia like a prized mare at market. She endured their attentions with practiced smiles while her heart remained in the garden, counting the hours until she could slip away again. Everything changed on a gray October morning when Lord Edmund Blackwell arrived with his entourage. Amelia watched from her window as the impressive carriage rolled up the drive, bearing the Blackwell coat of arms, a raven against a field of silver. Her stomach clenched as she realized what this visit meant. Amelia, come down immediately, her father called from the foyer. His voice carried the tone she had learned to dread, the one that meant another step toward a future she had never chosen. Lord Blackwell was everything a suitable husband should be. Tall, well-dressed, with sharp features and calculating eyes that seemed to catalog her worth as she descended the stairs. He took her hand and kissed it with practiced courtesy, while her father beamed with satisfaction. Lord Blackwell has come to discuss your future, Thomas announced. The betrothal contracts will be signed by month's end. Amelia felt the walls of her world closing in. She curtsied appropriately and made polite conversation, but her mind was racing. She had a month before her fate would be sealed. With legal documents and family expectations, that evening, she waited until the manor was quiet before slipping through the servants' passages. She had discovered in her explorations with Jackson. The hidden corridors wound through the walls like arteries, allowing her to move unseen from her room to the gardens. Jackson was waiting by the fountain, his face graved in the moonlight. You heard, she said softly, Alina told me. The servants know everything before the family announces it. His hands clenched at his sides. Lord Blackwell, I won't do it, Amelia said fiercely. I won't marry a man who looks at me like property to be acquired. Jackson's laugh was bitter. You think you have a choice? Girls like you don't get to? Choose Amelia. You get the illusion of choice, but the ending is always the same. Girls like me? Her voice sharpened. What exactly do you mean by that? Wealthy, privileged, protected? He turned away from her. You live in a world where your greatest worry is which silk dress to wear to dinner. I live in a world where one wrong word, one moment of stepping above my station could cost me everything. The accusation stung because there was truth in it. Amelia had never wanted for food or shelter, had never known the fear of losing her position or being cast out with nothing. But she had also never chosen the prison of her privilege. You think I don't understand struggle? She moved closer, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. Every day I wake up feeling like I'm suffocating. Every conversation about marriage feels like planning my funeral. Yes, I have comfort, but I've never had freedom. Never had choice until I met you. Jackson's shoulders sagged. When he turned back to her, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Amelia, what we have, it's impossible. Even if you refuse Blackwell, your father will find someone else, and eventually you'll have to marry. It's what women of your class do. Then let me choose, she whispered, stepping into his space. Let me choose you. I'm a man who works with his hands. I have no title, no fortune, no future to offer you beyond hard work and uncertainty. I don't want titles or fortunes, Amelia said, reaching up to cup his face. I want you. I want the man who talks about hope and growing things. I want the man who looks at me like I'm real, not like I'm a transaction to be completed.
Jackson
Caught her hands in his, holding them against his chest where she could feel his heart racing. If we were discovered, then we'll be careful. There are places we can meet, ways to see each other. For 2 weeks, they managed it. Alina helped, creating diversions when needed and carrying messages between them. They met in the old gardening shed when rain kept them indoors, in the hayloft above the stables during Jackson's lunch break, and in the grove of ancient oaks beyond the formal gardens when the moon was dark. Each meeting deepened their connection. Jackson told her about his dreams of having his own land someday, a small farm where he could grow things that mattered. Amelia shared her love of reading, the books she had devoured in secret that filled her head with ideas about independence and self-determination that her world deemed inappropriate for women. In the novels I read, she said one evening, as they sat beneath the largest oak, women sometimes choose their own paths. Novels aren't real life, Jackson replied, but he pulled her closer against his side. They could be. Somewhere else, in some other place, we could be. Jackson pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I love your dreams, Amelia. Even if they're impossible, but their careful web of secrecy began to unravel when Lord Blackwell extended his stay. He was more observant than they had anticipated, noting Amelia's frequent absences and distracted demeanor. Worse, he seemed to enjoy the hunt, watching her with predatory interest as he tried to determine what was causing her obvious reluctance. The crisis came on a moonless night in late October. Amelia had slipped out to meet Jackson in their usual spot by the oak grove, but Alina intercepted her in the corridor. Don't go tonight, Alina whispered urgently. Lord Blackwell was asking questions. About you this evening? He knows you leave your room at night? Then I'll be extra careful, Amelia replied. But Alina grabbed her arm. Dotto quotes Amelia, please. Jackson is my brother. If you're caught together, they won't just dismiss him. I'll make an example of him. The weight of Elena's words settled over Amelia like a shroud. In her determination to be with Jackson, she had forgotten that she wasn't the only one at risk. A lord's daughter, caught in an inappropriate relationship, might face scandal and punishment. But a servant who dared to reach above his station could face far worse still. She couldn't bear the thought of Jackson waiting for her in the cold. Wondering if she had abandoned him, against Elena's protests, she made her way through the passages to the garden. But as she approached their meeting place, she heard voices Lord Blackwell's cultured tones carrying on the night air. Interesting place for a midnight stroll, he was saying. Amelia froze, pressing herself against the trunk of a massive oak as she strained to hear Jackson's response. I was checking the grounds, my lord, ensuring everything is secure for the night. How diligent of you. Blackwell's voice carried amused skepticism. Tell me, do you often conduct your security rounds in the company of young ladies? Amelia's blood turned to ice, he knew. Somehow, Lord Blackwell had discovered their secret, and now Jackson was facing the consequences alone. I'm afraid I don't understand your meaning, my lord. Jackson's voice remained steady, but Amelia could hear the tension beneath his careful words. Lord Blackwell's laugh was cold as winter rain. Come now, there's no need for pretense. I've been watching you, see, noting Miss Rosewood's peculiar habits, her distracted demeanor, her frequent disappearances. It wasn't difficult to piece together. Amelia pressed her back against the oak tree, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain they would hear it. She should run, should flee back to the manor before she made things worse. But she couldn't abandon Jackson to face this alone. Sir, I assure you that I have conducted myself with complete propriety, Jackson said. Have you indeed? Blackwell's footsteps moved closer, And you won't mind explaining why the daughter of the house has been seen in your company on multiple occasions. Why she lingers in the gardens during your work hours. Why she watches you from her window each night. The accusation hung in the air like a blade. Amelia knew that Jackson's next words could determine both their fates. She also knew that Lord Blackwell was the kind of man who would use this knowledge as leverage, a weapon to ensure her compliance with the marriage arrangements. Before Jackson could respond, Amelia stepped out from behind the tree. "Because I asked him to teach me about the gardens," she said, her voice carrying more confidence than she felt. "Is it so unusual for a lady to take interest in her family's estate?" Both men turned toward her, but their reactions were vastly different. Jackson's face went pale with fear for her safety, while Blackwell's expression sharpened with predatory interest. "Amelia," Jackson said quietly, "you shouldn't be here." "Shouldn't I?" She moved to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "These are my family's grounds. Surely I have more right to be here than either of you." Blackwell studied them both with calculating eyes. How refreshing to see such dedication to horticulture. "Tell me, Miss Rosewood, has your garden education been thorough?" The innuendo in his voice made Amelia's skin crawl, but she forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. "Quite thorough, my lord. Jackson has taught me a great deal about cultivation. And growth, I'm certain he has." Blackwell's smile was sharp as a knife's edge. "Well, this has been illuminating. I believe I have everything I need for my conversation with your father tomorrow." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Jackson, I'd recommend you begin looking for new employment. Somehow, I doubt the Rosewoods will have need of your services much longer." After Blackwell disappeared into the darkness, Amelia and Jackson stood in silence. The weight of their exposure settled over them like a funeral shroud. "You should have stayed hidden," Jackson said finally, "and let you face him alone." "Never." Amelia turned to him, reaching for his hands. "Jackson, we have to leave. Tonight, leave." He stared at her as if she had suggested flying to the moon. "Amelia, where would we go? What would we do? Anywhere. Anything." Her words tumbled out in a desperate rush. "There are ships in the harbor that sail to the free cities. Places where class doesn't matter as much, where people can make their own way. With what money? What skills do you have beyond embroidery and piano playing?" The harsh truth of his words hit her like a physical blow she had never worked for. Wages never had to consider practical matters like lodging and food. But as she looked at Jackson's face in the moonlight, she realized that a comfortable cage was still a cage. "Oh, then teach me," she said fiercely. "Teach me to work, to be useful. I can learn." Jackson cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "My brave, impossible girl, do you understand what you're suggesting? If we run, there's no coming back. Your father will disown you. You'll lose everything." "I'll lose everything that doesn't matter," Amelia replied. "But I'll keep the one thing that does." They spent the remaining hours before dawn planning. Lena, when told of their intention, wept but promised to help. She gathered supplies, food, warm clothes, and what little money she had saved from her wages. Jackson cleaned out his own meager savings and made arrangements to sell his few possessions to a trusted friend in the village. The betrothal ceremony was scheduled for the following evening. Thomas Rosewood had planned a grand affair. With half the local nobility in attendance to witness his daughter's advantageous match, the irony was perfect while the guests celebrated Amelia's future with Lord Blackwell. She and Jackson would be boarding a merchant ship bound for Haven's Rest, the free port city 3-day sail to the south. But their plans nearly crumbled. When Thomas summoned Amelia to his study that afternoon, Lord Blackwell sat beside her father's desk. Wearing the satisfied expression of a cat who had cornered a particularly clever mouse. "Sit down, Amelia," Thomas said, his voice colder than she had ever heard it. "Lord Blackwell has shared some disturbing information with me." Amelia took the offered chair, keeping her spine straight and her expression calm. "Oh, regarding your inappropriate relationship with one of our servants?" Thomas's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. "I can hardly believe that. A daughter of mine would so disgrace herself." "I'm not sure what you mean, Father." Don't compound your shame with lies, Blackwell interjected smoothly. I saw you together last night. Your garden lessons were quite intimate.
Jackson
Has been nothing but respectful, Amelia said, meeting Blackwell's gaze steadily. If you're implying otherwise, you're mistaken, am I? Blackwell leaned forward. Then you deny having feelings for this man. You deny meeting him in secret? The question hung in the air like a test. Amelia could lie, could deny everything, and hope to maintain some pretense of innocence. Or she could tell the truth and face the consequences. She thought of Jackson's hands gentle on hers, of his voice when he spoke about hope and growing things. She thought of the life stretching ahead of her years, married to Blackwell, bearing his children, playing the role of dutiful wife, while her heart slowly died. I don't deny caring for him, she said quietly. Jackson is a good man, a kinder, and more honorable than many who claim nobility. Thomas's face went from red to purple. You admit it? I admit that I care for someone who sees me as more than a transaction to be completed. Amelia stood, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. I admit that I've found something real in a world full of pretense. Enough. Thomas slammed his hand on the desk. You will marry Lord Blackwell tomorrow evening as planned. And that servant will be gone from this house before sunset. Gone, Amelia's carefully maintained composure cracked. Father, please. Jackson has done nothing wrong. He has overstepped his position in the most egregious way possible, Blackwell said. Such behavior cannot be tolerated. Amelia looked between the two men, her father, red-faced with rage and disappointment, and Blackwell, whose eyes held the cold satisfaction of victory. In that moment, she realized that this had never been about love or marriage or even respectability. It was about power. It's about putting her in her place and ensuring that she never again forgot her role in their carefully ordered world. Very well, she said quietly. If those are your terms? Both men looked surprised by her sudden capitulation. You accept? Thomas asked suspiciously. I accept that you've made your position clear. Amelia moved toward the door. If you'll... Excuse me, I need to prepare for tomorrow evening. She left them looking puzzled, but satisfied, and went immediately to find Alina. The next few hours passed in a blur of careful preparation. Amelia packed only what she could carry, a few pieces of jewelry that could be sold for passage money, practical clothes, and a small leather journal where she had been writing her thoughts. As the sun set, she watched from her window as Jackson was escorted from the estate grounds by two of her father's men. The sight of him walking away, shoulders straight despite his dismissal, nearly broke her resolve. But they had planned for this. He would go to the harbor and wait for her at the inn they had chosen as their meeting place. The betrothal ceremony began at 8 o'clock. Amelia played her part perfectly, smiling graciously as guests congratulated her on her fortunate match. She danced with Blackwell, endured his possessive touch, and listened to speeches about her bright future as a lord's wife. At 10 o'clock, during the height of the celebration, she excused herself to freshen up. Instead of returning to the ballroom, she slipped through the servants' passages one final time. Alina waited at the kitchen entrance with a rough cloak and the small bundle of Amelia's belongings. Are you certain? Alina whispered as they embraced farewell. More certain than I've ever been about anything, Amelia replied. The walk to the harbor took 30 minutes through dark streets that smelled of salt and adventure. Amelia had never been in the port district after dark, had never seen the taverns full of sailors and merchants, the women who worked the docks, the children who played in the shadows despite the late hour. It was a different world from the one she had known, but it felt more real than the ballroom she had left behind. Jackson was waiting at the Widow's Anchor Inn, pacing the small room he had rented for the night. When Amelia knocked softly on the door, he opened it so quickly, she realized he must have been watching from the window. You came, he breathed, pulling her into his arms. Did you doubt I would? Every minute since they escorted me away. He held her tightly, his face buried in her hair. Amelia, once we board that ship, there's no going back. I know. She pulled back to look at him, memorizing his face in the flickering candlelight. Jackson, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person who met you in the garden. That girl was sheltered and naive. The woman standing here has made a choice. I choose you. I choose us. I choose a life where love matters more than law. He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Then we'd better go build that life. They sailed with the morning tide, standing at the ship's rail as the kingdom of Valdris disappeared into morning mist. Amelia had left behind everything she had ever known her: family, her fortune, her position in society. But as Jackson's arm tightened around her waist, and she felt the wind of possibility in her hair, she realized she had never felt so wealthy. The ship's captain, a weathered woman named Soraya, who asked no questions about passengers who paid, in gold told them that Haven's Rest was a city where the past mattered less than the future. Plenty of opportunities for folks willing to work hard, she said. Gardens need tending, they're same as anywhere else. Jackson squeezed Amelia's hand. Are you ready to learn about growing things in a new soil? With you? Amelia smiled. Her face turned toward the horizon, where their future waited. I'm ready for anything. 6 months later, Amelia Rosewood now, Amelia Thorne, knelt in the rich earth of their small garden plot outside Haven's Rest. Her hands were dirty, her dress was simple, homespun, and she had never been happier. Jackson worked beside her, teaching her the patience of seeds and the hope of spring planting. They had faced hardships, cold nights, and cheap lodgings, work that left them bone-tired, the challenge of building a life from nothing but determination and love. But they had also discovered joys that Amelia had never imagined: the satisfaction of earning their own bread, the freedom to walk hand in hand down any street. It's the simple pleasure of falling asleep each night beside the person who knew and loved every part of her. The jasmine is taking well to the new soil, Jackson observed, brushing dirt from his hands. Mother's flower, Amelia said, remembering his words from that first day in the Rosewood Gardens. Beautiful things growing in uncertain times. Jackson smiled, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. The most beautiful things, I think. As the sun set over their new home, Amelia thought of the ballroom she had left behind, of the life that had been planned for her by others. She had traded silk for homespun, a manor for a cottage, a title for true love. By any measure her former world would recognize, she had lost everything. But as Jackson spun her around their small garden while jasmine perfumed the evening air, Amelia knew she had gained the only thing that truly mattered, a love that grew stronger with each passing season, planted in the fertile soil of choice, and watered by the courage to follow her heart. Some love stories, she reflected, are worth any sacrifice, and some gardens bloom most beautifully when planted in the soil of freedom.